Good afternoon. Got my guest. Good afternoon and welcome to A Man's Guide for Appropriate Behavior in the 21st Century. My name is Scot Froelich. I am your host. Pronouns are he, him. A few quick things. Belay that last order. You are entitled to leave your phones back on for this one Fringe Festival show. I do ask that you keep them on silent and no flash photography or video recording. But I do want you to feel free to live tweet, take notes, send a message to a friend. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. You're missing out. But yeah, totally okay to keep your phones out. We are going to have a Q&A session for the last 10 minutes or so of today's discussion. So if you do have something that you'd like to ask, you can use your phone to take that notepad, write it on your forearm, however you want to do that. But just I do want to make sure that we reserve at least the 45 minutes for our panel here today. If the content gets a little heavy, that's totally understandable. If you need to step out, that's okay. No one in the audience or on the panel is going to judge you for that. Just do please be aware that the Fringe has a no re-entry policy. Finally, you may hear some terms thrown around today that you're not familiar with. That is totally okay. We're all here to learn. We can't know everything. Maybe take a note. We will usually try to cover what those terms are while we're talking. But go ahead and take a note and feel free to ask about that later. Today we are going to discuss producing theater, and we have an amazing panel for you today. I'm very excited for that. So we're going to start with introductions here with Leah Cooper.
Hi, I'm Leah Cooper. She, her, hers. About myself, yes?
Yeah.
I didn't prepare. You have a notepad? I didn't bring a notepad. Well, let's see. I've been here in Minnesota for 21 years. I have no idea how that happened. I moved here from Los Angeles and didn't expect to stay, but I tripped and fell and ended up running the Fringe Festival shortly after moving here, which I did for 5 years up until 2006. So that's how a lot of Fringers know me. I'm looking at Bob. I'm going to totally out you. That's Bob McFadden. He's the founder of the Fringe Festival. Since running the Fringe, I've also run co-founded MinnesotaPlaylist.com, of which I'm no longer a part of, but co-founded. Also was the first executive director of the Minnesota Theater Alliance. I am currently the co-artistic director of Wonderlust Productions, a community-driven theater company in St. Paul. And I occasionally am a freelance director and consultant helping people with organizational things.
Our next panelist, Marcela.
My name is Marcela Michelle. I am a theater maker here in the Twin Cities. Been working here for about 5 years now. As a producer, I'm an associate producer with 20% Theater Company. I'm the artistic producer of Q Stage New Work series and of Lightning Rod, now in its third year, being supported in kind by Pillsbury House and by MRAC. Some independent work, recently produced Body Fill Body in the Dowling Studio at the Guthrie, and some other things. I'm around.
Thank you. Colleen.
Hi, I'm Colleen Somerville, and I am the baby producer on this panel. I produced my first show last year at Fringe called Not Fair, My Lady, and kind of have had a huge response to just kind of that kind of work, and so I started a company that's Somerville Productions, and we are starting the Women's Theater Initiative, which is going to be raising money for women to make theater. This year in Fringe, I produced Size at Theater in the Round, and I'm in Edith Gets High. That has its closing show that I will be sprinting to after this. So if you do see me kind of antsing at the end, that is why. But yeah, I've been here since 2005, and I started out as an actor, and then I kind of like started to hate all theater. And so then I was like, I need to make my own shit. So I started to.
Yeah.
I am Derek Washington. Most people call me Duck. You can feel free to do so. Still he, him pronouns, even with the waterfowl name. I've been doing theater in the Twin Cities ever since I moved here for college in 1995. I serve on the board of directors for Fearless Comedy Productions and the Rinky Dink Operations that did Nellie Bly in the festival, and then I'm recently added to the board of directors for the Twin Cities Horror Festival as well. I produce often with under my own company, which is Rogues Gallery Arts. I'm a member of Blackout Improv and the Theater of Public Policy, and then I'm an instructor at Huge Theater.
Woo!
Oh, and I should say in regards to this as well, I used to work for a diversity and inclusion firm that worked on building inclusive spaces, workplaces in general, not theaters.
And Duck and Marcela were both in previous discussions as well. Duck was here for our workplace and street harassment discussion. Marcela was here for gender, sexuality, inclusivity, or intersectionality.
Gun violence.
And that's pretty much what it ended up being. Yeah. So it's, thank you all for being here today. I do want to address a topic that is probably kind of on oh, wait, no, I have to do the quiz first. Right. Leah's smarter than me. So she knows. So I want to poll the audience real quick. How many theater industry folks do we have here today? But not everybody. So we have some folks who have come from outside the theater industry. That's awesome. How many have trained a little or a lot in HR practices? It's a little bit smaller number. Okay. And then how many of you have spent some time thinking about privilege and implicit bias? That's awesome. And then I think the one other question was how many of you have worked in equity and inclusion practices? All right. So just so the panel sort of knows, where we comfort level is with some of the subjects. So now on to the first question for panelists. We did have a situation, I guess, incident at another show at this festival about a week ago, where improv performer doing a puppet routine assaulted an audience member. The circumstances as reported were that they had asked her if she wanted to help teach the puppet Braille, and she said yes, to which he then used the puppet to touch her breasts. So one of the questions that I think a lot of folks are wondering about, I know I'm wondering about, is we may not be able to stop things from happening, but more about what's a good response? What do we do when situations like this happen? And I'm looking at Leah first.
Why are you looking at me first?
Do you want to just maybe give an idea of what can be done in organizations?
Well, I think it really depends on what role you're in.
Right.
Right. I think if you're the person being groped, you're in a difficult spot.
Right.
I think often we put the onus on victims to deal with stuff, and that can be really hard because the very nature of being assaulted is you're in an activated, triggered state, which can cause all kinds of things, including fight, flight, and freeze, which don't arm you well to have a good response, and it shouldn't be on the victim, right?
Sure.
So I think all of us have to ask ourselves where we are on a power hierarchy, and how are we able to be allies, and how are we able to be effective, right? This is a question I'm asking myself nearly daily now, in a way that I didn't used to. I started off as a young actress in my teens, and it was a long time ago. I'm not even going to tell you all how long ago. I'm 51 years old. You can do the math. It was a different world, right? And I didn't even know you could say anything, right? I mean, I got the list of things that happen to young actresses. You guys all know what it is. I was in Los Angeles, so trust me. And since then, part of the reason I stopped being an actress was because of that. I was like, enough with the casting couch, and enough with the being groped, and enough with the fellow actor who sticks their tongue down your throat that we didn't plan in rehearsal, right? And the idea that if you say something, you're difficult, and all that, And so that's how I made my way into directing. Actually, was I wanted more power. Well, now I find myself 35 years later, and I'm a producer, and I'm a director, and I'm an artistic director, and sometimes I'm a consultant, and I find myself with power, and with that comes responsibility, right? I wasn't there for this performance, but one of the things I heard that really inspires and excites me was that the audience held this performer accountable in the very moment that it happened. Oh my gosh, what a wonderful example of being an ally, right? Of realizing you have power that is maybe not obvious and not stated, right? As an audience member, yeah, you bought a ticket, but the Fringe is not very expensive. wonderfully. So it's not like you're like, I funded this thing, but you're like, I'm an audience member. That's a certain kind of power. And the fact that that audience felt empowered to speak up, I think that's one of the first areas of responsibility we all have, is what I'm getting at. What's your power in this moment? What can you do to shift what's happening? As far as what organizations, though, that's complicated, and I could say more on that if you want, but I don't want to monopolize.
Can you
the
talk
floor.
a little bit about the legality of not having the show pulled immediately? Because that's the thing that I have grappled with a lot as a person in the festival. Is I heard a lot of talk in the community about how legally we can't pull the show, and I'm like, why not? I mean, why don't we have something in place before the festival starts, to where that is just a thing that there's no gray area here, right? There has to be something in the contract for the festival. That's just been my initial reaction, and I have no connection to any of the legalities that go along with it. So I would love to hear anybody's experience with that.
I don't know. I mean, I did a series of exchanges with Dawn Bentley after I had found out that this had occurred, because I wanted to know what was being done. I knew that the second performance had gone forward, and I wanted to do my best to try to keep Fringe audiences safe. You know, I think as a performer and a producer in this environment, it's my responsibility to do everything I can to make sure that people who walk into the doors feel like that they're going to be safe from having violence enacted on them, whether it be, you know, an actual violence or, you know, a sexual assault or something of that nature happening. I understand that it's hard to catch that stuff at the door, you know, but once it's happened, I think it's really important that we relook and we re-examine the policies that surround what is appropriate behavior in the festival. If we can kick a show out for using glitter, I think we can kick a show out for harassing people in the audience.
Yes.
You know, like I think it, like, if you put language in your producers' contracts or your handbooks that say things like, you know, a show that gives the impression that a member of the audience or the community is in immediate danger of violence or sexual assault, we reserve the right to pull your show from the festival. I don't think that that's language that's censoring. I think that's language that keeps people safe.
Yeah.
How is that not in there yet?
We're not talking about free speech. We're talking about bodily autonomy.
Right.
We're talking about keeping your hands off of other human beings. Like, yeah.
Right.
And consent. And I think the question that emerges for me when we're talking about this, you said, okay, it's great that the audience felt the agency for that collective responsibility to exist. I think it's a lot easier for a Fringe audience there is a greater sense of community in this festival, and so there's more access to that agency. Whereas if this were to happen in a big house, in a big stuffy house.
Oh, like the Ordway or the Guthrie?
Sure, yeah.
No,
Well, okay, speak in
right?
certain terms. It might be like, would that be the outcome? And that's what, and so how do we bring this conversation to the spaces where the outcome would not be that? Like, how do we expand this conversation? We're all in agreement here, right? But how do we get it out there?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, I think this presents a really interesting opportunity. I mean, first of all, I can't speak for the Fringe. I haven't worked here in 15 years.
Yeah.
But second of all, I want to say that every single rule in that darn producer's handbook got put in there because something happened, not because we thought it was going to happen, right? Like, the things people will do are hard to think of. It's amazing. Like, if you had asked me, would somebody do that? What you just described, I'd be like, what kind of jackass would do that, right? So, I do think there's an opportunity for the Fringe to respond, right? And that's its own conversation. I'm curious to hear more what kind of a response you got. But I also think this presents this really great opportunity to talk about the power dynamics at play in theaters.
Yeah.
Because there are many, and a lot of them are unspoken.
Yeah.
Right? The rules of who has power in theater, just the very nature of a proscenium and a large space and the intimidating class structures in place around theater. Which are the same thing that play into actors getting assaulted as audience not thinking they have any agency, right? So I do think there's this opportunity to have this go beyond this great community into better policies, right?
as far as the responses that I got, I had initially contacted them on through the Fringe's website contact form, and Dawn Bentley wrote me back in a letter that was very kind of formally written. That was, this is an unjuried festival. We can't really, we don't select who gets into the festival. If someone does something that's against the law, we will pull a show from the festival, and we will update the content warnings appropriately if we feel like they aren't correct.
Yeah, it said abide by all federal, state, and local laws and ordinances. Yeah.
And so my response to that was, it sounds like you're telling me that all that's happening is that you're updating the content warning. This makes me very scared to be a producer here and to invite audiences to come here. I want to know what else can be done. And then John wrote back and was like, I want to assure you that there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. That she wasn't at the first performance, and at the second performance no audience interaction happened, and that they had conflicting reports about consent from members of the audience, and asked if I had been a member of that audience because they wanted to hear from eyewitness accounts. And I was like, no, I was not. Here are the names of 4 people who I know were in that audience. Yeah. One of them has already written a review, outlining the extent of that assault, which didn't stop at the groping. There were also continued requests to feel that audience member's genitalia. And that's when the audience eventually stepped in after the audience member said no, and he continued to assault her by continuing to ask. Eventually, the audience got to the point where they were like, no means no, and then he moved on with the rest of his show. But so this was all documented in the review, so I was like, you can look to that. I'll have these people reach out to you, and I reached out to all those people to have them send in statements. And then I also asked, I was like, I know there was a technician there. Did the technician say something? And Dawn said that she would follow up with the people I had mentioned, and then after that, the performer had decided to withdraw himself from the festival. So there was no Fringe action that took him out specifically, unless that was something that happened behind the scenes that we didn't see.
So it is my opinion that, like what Leah was saying, there's a great deal of responsibility that comes with this power. Mm-hmm. And I also was acting and was like, I don't really like what's happening here, so I want to direct, I want to produce, right? Mm-hmm. And so then you have this power. I think if someone's body is in danger, you make a decision and you deal with whatever the legal repercussions. If you have to fight this person in court, that's your responsibility. That's your job. It is not on the onus of the audience. It's not on the onus of the survivor. It's not on the onus of these people to come and say, but look, here's all this proof. Someone's body was put in danger. It's over. It's over, and we can deal with whatever else in due time, is how I feel about it.
And I think as a producer, I try to enter into every situation that there is no situation that I could get in myself into where my hands will be completely tied. Mm-hmm. There is no, not actually. There may be legal things, there may be things that could come back to bite me, there may be lawsuits, but your hands are not actually tied. Mm-hmm. So what you show the community by pulling that show is reassuring to all of us as a community that we are all safe in this situation, right? So I just get a little twitchy about the whole because at one point I know that they were going to have a representative there at every show to make sure.
I mean, that wasn't in Dawn's email to me, but I did hear that from other people who he'd communicated.
And right. I feel like there have been, and there's many things in the city we could talk about, but there's a lot of situations where it's like, let's just put like a little tiny Band-Aid on it and see if that does it. And then everybody's like, no. And then like, okay, we'll do a little bit more. No. Like, why can't we just start with absolutely not and then figure it out from there? Yeah. I don't understand the feeling of not 100% supporting someone who has been assaulted in your theater.
And the laws are laws, rules are rules. Like, who has that served historically? Who is
Right.
it serving in this moment?
Right. And then now that I'm thinking about producing in the 2020 Fringe, I'm like, I'm upset that I didn't look for it before this, but now I will be looking for language for every show that I produce from now on. So it taught me a good lesson, but if that language isn't there, we're all going to be like, this is not a thing. Which I think is a good power to have.
Yeah, in the past, I've produced a couple of Fringe Festival shows. They've been solo shows, to be perfectly honest. But I hire a director, I hire a choreographer, and they all get contracts, and it all has language in there that is above and beyond what's in the producer handbook here for Fringe. And is that, the onus shouldn't be on individual producers, right? Or is that some way that producers can sort of cover themselves as well to also do their own contracts?
Well, there's a varying level of experience because it's unjuried, and
Sure.
that's one of the beautiful things about Fringe,
Mm-hmm.
I think. So I don't know. I think it's the job of the institution. I think it's the job of who has the most power and who knows the most about what this thing might look like. And it's great that there are experienced producers who work in Fringe who know to do these things. And there will be people who are like, this is my first show since I was in the 6th grade, and I was like, I don't know how to write a contract.
I had to copy and paste.
But also, if I were to write a contract for my cast and something like that happened, I would have no power in a festival like this. It would be, I mean, I would have the power to pull out and lose my
Right.
connection to the Fringe, but it would have to be from the Fringe, not from the individual producers.
Sure.
I was just going to add, as a freelance director, I've often found myself in a role. I'm taking us out of the Fringe in my reaction right now because I could say so much more, but it would involve a lot of back in my day. And I found most people don't like sentences to start with back in my day. I know as a freelance director, I have often found myself in the odd position of dealing with, for lack of a better word, a gray area situation that wasn't discussed in advance, right? In which I didn't hire the people that I'm working with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not comfortable with their behavior. And I have a certain amount of power, but I am a contractor, right?
Yeah.
And they're not even a subcontractor to me. They're also a contractor. I mean, for those of you not working in the theater industry, most of us do not work as employees. We work as contractors, which means we have less protection and less accountability from both a legal standpoint and just a practices standpoint. So it's all vague,
Yeah.
right? How you deal with this stuff. And as a freelance director, you're often a middle person in these situations, and it does make you question, like just what you said about, if I was a producer in the Fringe, how much power, how much control do I have over what's happening? And I think what we're all learning is what are the things I should have thought of before I said yes? What are the things I should have insisted on before I said yes? What are the things I should have discussed with everybody as we went along so that we're all on the same page? Because all of this stuff comes up out of it. Well, I just assumed nobody would do something like that, right?
You can't assume.
Yeah, and speaking for my own little theater company, we have gone, and we work with a mixture of professional artists and community members. As I said, we're community engaged, and so our shows have people in them who've never performed in their life, and they're often performing shows with content related to their life. So they're particularly emotionally open and vulnerable when they show up to work with us, in a way that even goes beyond what actors are. By the way, actors are extremely emotionally vulnerable. That's their job. We've hired them to do that, right, as are all artists. And then you take people who are actually mining their own personal experience, and you have to really start thinking about what is a safe space. Right? And so we've gone back and written and talked, and now we have like a community values agreement that we start everything with. And we don't just say, here it is. We say, let's talk about it. Is there anything you want to add? Is there anything you don't understand? How do you feel about this? And I think this idea of entering into communal consensus is a practice we all have to think about applying in more and more places.
Yeah.
So can we take that direction then and talk about that? I know, like with the Not in Our House thing in Chicago, and a lot of theaters have started to look at HR policies and practices and things like that, and how do we make them safe spaces? How do we tell theaters they need to have that for the ones who don't? And for the theaters who do have that, what kind of practices do you think are working, and how do we grow that?
I've been a really huge fan of all of the strides that Huge Theater has taken to try to create safe spaces. It kind of floors me, you know, like there especially because it's an improv theater and it's really hard to regulate what's going to end up happening on that stage. But we have regular conversations with our students, with our performers, about boundaries, both physical and content boundaries, so that we can help try to minimize and mitigate those things from happening. So everyone has a chance before we get started to go forward and say, I'm not comfortable with this kind of a thing. I'm not comfortable with being hugged. I'm not comfortable with being touched. Or we might say something like, we're just going to keep everything at handshakes or high fives for this performance. Does that work with everyone in the room? Maybe we'll elevate that to hugs. Does that work with everyone in the room? And try to keep it so that people aren't singled out as well. Sometimes we do blind voting on comfortability things so that people don't feel embarrassed to be the one who says, I don't want to be touched. I don't want to do a show that has child abuse in it, so on and so forth. They work very extensively with Fair Play Minnesota, which tries to really help educate theaters on how to do a lot of this kind of work. And I think it's been exceptional. And I try to model a lot of the things that I've learned becoming on staff at Huge to the other organizations I go to as well.
Sure.
I work directly with my community. Like my work is very centered around queer and trans artists of color, and so it feels easier, I think, to have a collective understanding of what our boundaries are. I think the more you expand outside of direct communities or identity-based communities or neighborhood-based communities into wider net, the wider your net is, the more needs to be in place. The more structure needs to be in place. And I like what Duck is talking about, and it makes me think about the people who you see them sort of wake up to this question of consent. You see people be like, whoa, I didn't know that I assumed that by coming here and agreeing to do improv that it was possible that something bad was going to happen to me, and I didn't know that I could say, I don't want to participate in that kind of thing. So these kinds of verbal check-ins to me, these real-time check-ins, are just as important as the piece of paper that's in the dressing room, as the piece of paper that's in the scene shop, is that work.
So one of the questions that I intended to ask sort of first up here before all of this happened was about, you work for 20% Theater. We've all worked for, we've all experienced companies that have really good representation, but the vast majority of theaters for the longest period of time have not had the greatest of representation. And I guess just show of hands, doesn't have to say how, but how many people here have had a negative or adverse run-in with a cis white man at some point in the theater community? One of the things that keeps coming up through these discussions is how we talk to those people who are in positions of power, and get them to be more aware of their responsibility to use that for good. One of the things that comes to mind for me is representation. And so one of the questions that I have here is about whether it's in casting, design work, directors, how do we get more honest representation? If the characters are intended to be gay, do we make sure that we hire gay characters, gay actors? How do we ensure better representation?
I was reading the question that in the email you had posed to me, and so I went and looked at some numbers and was able to find some numbers from 2015, 2016. And it was something like, of the 450 positions of stage management, 3 of them were African American on Broadway and in regional theaters. Whoa. And it's this, so great, we've got 35%, we've gone up from 20% to 35% in like acting. Cool, but who's directing, who's producing, whose plays are being produced, who's right? Like those things haven't really changed. And as far as like to talk about this thing about straight actors playing gay characters, I, as a queer person, don't really feel any kind of way about that. Like, I think that it's a different question than a question of race. It's a different question than a question of transness. And I think that it, like, that's one of those opportunities where, like, you can learn about a community by engaging in a role that is not your personal experience. Like, I don't, because there is more visibility, I would have felt differently about this question 10 years ago. But because we've seen more gay actors being cast in roles for gay people, I feel less intense about that. I feel very specifically about cis people playing trans people because we're still fighting tooth and nail to get these jobs. And like, honey, if you don't think we can act, we are trained. So that's just like my little 2 cents on that. But to go back to the question of race, like 20% is a limited name. 20% isn't breaking down race in that, right? That's just saying women.
Yeah.
But like black women, oh my God, 3%.
Yeah.
3%. You know? So
Yeah.
there's numbers inside that number.
Right.
And it's important that we, like, step 1, name it. Step 2, fucking do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, it's always been, I mean, well, in the last couple of years, it was like, I literally woke up and I was like, I'm only auditioning for white men. I'm only in shows. I'm like dying to work at these theaters that are all people that are just all the same person. And it was like that moment of just like, okay, I'm going to take it under, like, I have only power of what I'm doing. So I am going to call out, like, when I get an audition notice that comes through, like, recently I got an audition for a season and one of the shows was Little Women and it was being directed by a man, and I just responded with, I won't be auditioning, and also, like, I think it's really silly that you have a man directing this. And I think it's just calling it out in small, tiny, in like little ways any time you can is what I feel the power to do, because I can't just go to Chanhassen and change things.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to be able to do that, but I can not give them my money. I cannot audition there, and when they send me audition notices, I can respond and say no thanks.
Yeah. And
that's where I'm starting, and I think that that's an easy thing for all of us to do as members of this community, just to be like, I just don't like that. Please don't do that.
The thing that I've been saying to companies when they've been like, so I do a lot of extra work if I'm hired to act in a show or to direct a show, because that inevitably comes with like, hey, have you thought about this? And there's just nothing I can do about it, right? Like I know that that's going to happen. Like, it's going to happen. And sometimes I'm like, you need to pay me more. And sometimes there's nothing, I don't have that power. But when companies come to me, whether I'm in a show or not, and they're like, hey, we're doing A Raisin in the Sun, and we need a black woman to direct it. So do you know any black women ever? I'm like, if you're doing Glengarry, Glen Ross, which, like, ew, but if you're doing it, you need a black woman to be directing. Like, I don't understand. Like, we're doing a show about trans people, so we need a trans dramaturg. You're doing Noises Off, you need a trans dramaturg.
Yes.
Like, it's not about pigeonholing us. It's not about the specificity of only calling us when you think like we should be there. Like, I'm just as capable of directing Albie as I am of directing Wilson. So what's up? What's good?
Yeah. Number one, stop asking people to speak for an entire group of people and expecting them to also be an artist at the very same time.
Yeah.
Right? Either they're an artist or they're not. And if they're an artist, you need to consider them for everything.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm just echoing. I guess I also just wanted to add, along the lines of representation, really dovetailing off of what you're saying, Marcela, I think it's really context specific, right? Who's marginalized right now? Whose voices aren't being heard? Whose voices are being pigeonholed? And and they need to be included, and not just because you wrote one part for them, right? They just need to be in the room so that you're learning and that worldview is represented in the art you're making. I don't care if it's A Raisin in the Sun, or it's Edward Albee, or it's Glenn Ross, or Death of a Fucking Salesman.
I'm not familiar.
And also not just one, right? Stop making people speak alone, because it's scary as hell to be the one. So a really smart performer in this town named Theo Langeson, some of you know, was on a panel with me a while back, and he said this really smart thing. He said, if you are feeling discomfort about somebody else's oppression, what you are actually feeling is that you are finally sharing a tiny bit of it. So sit with that for a second. You are finally sharing a little bit of what they have been carrying alone. And so when you say, but we have one black actor in the show. That one black actor, they're sitting there alone deciding whether to tell you you're being an idiot today, whether they want to take that on, whether they want to deal with all of the emotional weight of every microaggression they have ever felt, which comes up for them every time they have to tell you you're being an idiot, right? So not just one, more than one, so they're not always alone, right? And not just playing the one black part you wrote into your play, or the one trans part that made it trendy to do this play, right? And not just that you're getting credit in the grant, right? And don't make them stand in front when you take a photo so that you look like you're woke, right? Like genuinely inviting a diversity of voices into the room and giving them the authority to not speak alone, not speak after rehearsal's over, not speak after you've already made all your damn decisions, right? Also, maybe talk to them before the first rehearsal about what you're asking them to do, and own what you're asking them to do. Are you asking them to play a part? Or are you asking them to give you cultural advice? And if you're asking them to give you advice about how to run your rehearsal room, maybe you need to pay them more, right?
That's a
These are all the things you need to be asking yourself if you're like, I want to do diversity.
So you used a word there that I want to hone in on, which is invite. And I think I've heard a lot of producers, directors over the years say, oh, well, that's just who showed up to auditions.
Why?
Why?
What is the history of your organization?
Right. And so if there is a company who says that, who's like, well, this is just who showed up to auditions before, how do you get them to move to that next place where people do want to come and audition for them?
Well, I think one of the big mistakes that gets made is there's this assumption that like that putting out that audition notice is enough, that we need, but the reality is that it takes work to create a diverse performance space. Like, if you don't have those people that you've worked with before, you need to go find them. You need to really grind up, go see their shows and be like, hey, I saw this, I really like it, I wonder if I can talk to you about theater, I'd love to partner with you on something sometime. Like, start to build those relationships so that maybe you can get those people into your organizations. Just posting a classified ad isn't going to necessarily work. And then the next step to that is, casting is just the tipping point. Once you get those people into your organizations, think about what you're doing to support their experience. Because if they don't feel like they have that experience that's valuable to them, and feels comfortable and feels like they felt safe and that they had a voice, they're not going to come back. So make sure you're doing your due diligence to create a work environment where everybody can bring their best. And that's the best way to get those people into your organization.
And know that it's going to be hard work and you're going to fuck up, and it's about how you handle that fuck up, and because we know you're going to fuck up. I'm prepared. I came prepared. I like what you're saying about go out and see. The number of times, and it just it keeps happening to me recently, so I'm a little hot about it. But these big houses will call me in because they're familiar with me and they like my work, and I'll be talking to them about 20%, or I'll be talking to them about Pangea, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm not familiar," and I'm like, "How? That's your job. It is not 20%'s job to know about the Guthrie. It's the Guthrie's job to know about 20%. Who has the power? It's beyond me, and I hope, may I always have this, right, as I infiltrate? Like, may I always know about what's happening in my town? Like, you're not connected to your community. You're not going to be as successful in expanding your diversity work, your equity work, your inclusivity, if you're not aware of who's already doing it around you.
And I can promise you that, like, the big arts organization like the Guthrie said, we want to build the community so that we can have these people involved in our theater, and we're going to send some of this money that we get and invest it into Pangea, to invest it into some of these smaller companies. That immediately forms a relationship between that company and that theater. But we don't really see that kind of.
And it behooves you not to let Intermedia Arts die. It behooves you not to let Patrick's Cabaret die. It behooves you not to let these companies cease to be.
Yeah.
That's a conversation for the funders, yes?
Just looking to see where we're good.
Yeah.
We're good. You don't have to run away just yet.
No.
So last question before we get to the audience Q&A section here. Are there resources out there? Things that, whether it's contacting Huge and like send us your book, we want to know the right ways to do these things. Are there resources that theater companies can use to get better at these things?
My dream job, if anybody wants to hire me to do this, is to like be a person that can just sit in the back of the room and just be like, wait, I just think about this. Maybe this is your, maybe just like, maybe don't do that play instead. I mean, I'm not saying that's not.
I've done it.
I mean, that's like, and I think that there is, so I don't have an answer to that question. So if anybody does have a resource answer, but I have a daydream about that question.
Consultants, I think, like hire you, it's going to cost money. Hire me, hire Leah Cooper, hire Lisa Brimmer, hire Taja Will, like hire people who do that work to come to your theater and to like talk to you about
and when
your
you're picking a season, when you're picking, like this is before you've hired anybody. You need to sit down with someone who is thinking in that hugely broad way, always, at all times. Like I don't understand not coming to a season, not thinking through that whole aspect.
Also, there are organizations that exist to provide resources for you, and some of them provide them, and some of them you should be asking them to provide them for you, right? So there is the Minnesota Theater Alliance. While I was there, we created the Performing Arts Human Resources Toolkit series called Parts that is still archived on their website. This was a problem we identified years ago where we said, gosh, it seems like theater people don't know anything about human resources, and yet they are, in fact, held to the same laws that 3M is held to about good human resource practices. So we did create a whole archive of materials you can look at, Minnesota Theater Alliance, mntheateralliance.org. Also at the national level, Theater Communications Group has a lot of resources. HowlAround, HOWLROUND.com, is a fantastic publication with really inspiring catalytic articles that will make you think, and they all come with links to other things. I think Scott's blog has some really good links, I'm just going to say.
I will jump in for like a hot second. The blog is 21stcenturymen.tumblr.com. It's on the website, so you can go and click to it. Now that we're at the last show, I can say this. These are all going to be recorded and put online.
Ooh, fancy.
And the videos...
Should I not have been swearing?
The videos will have... Just be you. The videos will have, so like as Leah is saying these things, in the video it will come up with a hot link where you can go to those resources.
Wow.
So all of this is going to be available online. Not tomorrow, because it does take a little while to put all this together. But just know that these resources aren't going into a black hole, and they will be available online.
Can I just also add the
Yes.
second thing I said, that there are organizations who should be giving you these resources, right? Talk to the funders, talk to Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, talk to the Minnesota State Arts Board, talk to anybody who funds art and say, we need help, our community needs help, you guys should be funding better HR practices. And not just asking them to answer a question about diversity like they do right now, but funding better HR practices. Also, there are unions. The unions should be more involved in this than they currently are, whether we're talking about the Actors Union, the Screen Actors Guild, IATSE, the Stage Directors and Choreographers. That's what unions are for, y'all. And if you're not in a union, maybe think about whether you want to be in one, because they can help with this. And lastly, we do have the Minnesota Theater Alliance here, and they're always looking for, my understanding is, I don't work there anymore, but my understanding is they're always looking for, what do you want from us? Tell them, we want ongoing training, we want help.
Cool. Thank you. So yeah, all that's going to be available. Now that we have like Actually, we're a little ahead of schedule, which is awesome. We have one question already right here.
I don't have a question so much as I felt invited because you said my name. If you just Google "Not My House," I heard you mention it.
Yeah.
But Laura Fisher, who's the kind of primary caretaker on the Chicago Theater Standards, "Not My House" is available for download, and you can take any part of that, and it is a comprehensive HR. Laura Fisher and I were on a couple of panels last year and this year nationally to talk about developing HR in the artist workplace and what codes of conduct look like. There are a lot of people who have free documents online already, and they come from the music world, they come from the dance world, they come from the theater world. And making that for yourself is something I do for my company, but also I could give you a list of 10 names right now of consultants in the Twin Cities who are doing that, myself included. One thing that I heard multiple times that I wanted to just give a little snap about, not a good snap, but hey, how much do you say this? How much do you say safe space? How much do any of us say, to make a safe space, we will. A safe space is this. And I would challenge that as someone who has felt that in myself, I have to make a safe space. Actually, we have no idea what that is. What does a safer, braver space look like? That's the imagining that opens this.
Ditto.
I have so many more things to say, but I'm not being paid to be on this panel. So,
Send me your info next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Questions?
I just have a question about, I know I heard you say glitter was a reason the show got brought out, and just my curiosity, so does that mean in the book it says you're not allowed to use glitter, your show
Yeah.
is out?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is there
same
a
with-
capacity of glitter? Because that now says to me that glitter and sexual assault is on the same level, and I feel like it just feels weird hearing that, and I don't know what the glitter is.
Well, it's not even on the same level because the
It's
sexual
not,
assault
it's
part.
not, and it's
No, but
not.
I'm saying the sexual assault part wasn't even in there. So
Yeah.
the glitter was on a higher level. I mean, just saying.
Well, and again, I don't work for the Fringe, so I'm not here to defend the Fringe, but I will say every rule in the producer's handbook got added because somebody did
Oh, yeah,
something, right?
absolutely.
And this might be the first year that somebody is saying, hey, by the way, puppets shouldn't touch people's breasts without consent. And one of the best ways that you can affect how the Fringe shapes its policies is to talk to them, like Duck did, and even to consider getting on their board of directors, right? Dawn does not make her decisions alone. She reports to a board of directors. That's how I ended up running the damn Fringe, so be careful.
Just to piggyback on that, how, so we can write letters. I'm aggressively going to be making sure that there's something put into the contract for next year. Can you advise, besides writing letters, is there more that we can do? Because,
My impression is Dawn is usually willing to talk to people. She's the executive director. You
Set
could
up a little
call her
date.
up. I would wait until after August because trust me, the Fringe staff is super duper tired by this point and for the next couple of weeks probably. Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, when I was running the Fringe, one of the reasons I love living in Minnesota, one of the reasons I've stayed here is because people talk to each other, because people at the top of certain hierarchies, not all of them alas, but many hierarchies, will call you back.
yeah.
Right? And I took a personal pride in, I will talk to anybody and I want to hear, and I'll start with, tell me what you're feeling and how this affected you and your ability to make art, because that's what we're here to do, right? And my impression is that all my predecessors and most of my followers, including Dawn, also care and want to talk.
So just
Yeah, so I guess,
go to the website and get an appointment.
Yeah, she's not hard to reach. And I guess I also just want to say part of our job is to hold organizations accountable. And we do that best not by sitting in rooms going, well, they must just be a bunch of jerks, I don't know. But instead by going, hey, I want to give you an opportunity not to be a jerk. Right? That's my 2 cents.
I've reached out to Don several times this week and talked to Amber a lot and came away with the information that I came back with, confident that they were handling the situation in the midst of the chaos. And without sharing the details of what they said, I think I can echo what was just said, that they were very accessible, very willing to talk about it on a very personal level, and I don't think we need to treat this specific organization with that level of formality I think it's one of the beauties of the fact that we are this community, and I love what Leah said about creating that communal communication of code, like a code of conduct, but there's a better word for it. But I think that we have a unique opportunity in the Fringe to look at what happened here and put that language in. And I heard everything that I think needs to happen in this panel. It was like all there. And I think we just need to move forward and talk about it.
And the Fringe is in this really great position to be a role model, as you say. I mean, this is something I really enjoyed when I was working there, was that so many of the producers are first-time producers, and they're taking their cues from how to do things by how the Fringe tells them to in the handbook, right? When we added ASL interpreters, right? How many producers at MRAC told us? MRAC said, oh my God, we're getting so many grant requests for ASL interpreters now because you taught all the Fringe producers to get ASL interpreting, damn it, you know, and we're like, yes, right? And so there's a Fringe is this beautiful opportunity for this moment, as long as there is a conversation, as long as you all do make your voices heard and say, this is how we want our community to be, and then it gets passed on.
And I'm definitely not up here, you know, screaming like "burn the festival down" or anything. I do definitely think that there are people who are working very hard, but I do think, and I know, negotiating these things legally is complicated. But I think our audiences and our performers really do want to see some kind of a formal response from the Fringe, which has not been made on this particular issue. So if the Fringe is out there, I've already sent my email. I encourage you to make a statement about how you're moving forward on this subject.
That's it.
So, two questions. One, do we feel in our theater community that Fringe is truly a tastemaker, and that what happens here will affect other companies? And in tandem with that, like, outside of our beautiful 11-day summer camp, what else what else should we be doing? Because, you know, we still gotta encounter the Guthrie 365, right? And while Fringe is this great thing, and actually highly responsive compared to so many other organizations that could have been the topic of today. I'm like, yeah, cool. Let's focus on what's happening now, but like, what should we be doing next time? What are things that we should be keeping in mind? What are steps when we know that writing a letter or sending an email will end in nothing?
One of the things, so the specific performer, Daniel Moore, who did the Wolfie Beat Bad Touch Your Boob show, he is involved with other communities. And I know those communities are watching to see what the Fringe does. The Convergent Science Fiction Festival, I know he walks around that festival every year. And then the question is how do we keep that space safe now that we know this about this performer? And I've heard people talking, not official stances from that festival, but I've heard people talk about like, well, we'll need to see and mitigate, like, you know, what the response from the Fringe is. So as happy as I was that he retracted his performance, I almost wanted to see, you know, I wanted to see the end, like what the actual eventual action would be, because it might influence or impact the way other organizations or festivals or performances handle that performer or performers like him.
Yeah.
Piggybacking on that, how do, when someone has done something in one place, how do we keep them from going to another place and doing the same thing? I mean, word of mouth is one thing, but we've seen a number of cases in which it just doesn't work. How do we as a community build a space where those people are no longer welcome once they have done something that violates another member of the community?
Yeah.
Well, I will say I'm gonna take maybe the less popular position. I happen to be right now. My company's making a play about the incarceration system, and what is on my mind right now is restorative justice practices, because I think there is some danger in saying these people are bad and they should be excluded forever and ever and ever. That is in fact what our incarceration system does, and in effect we amputate our arm to make our body healthier, and that is not always the long-term healthiest thing, right? And then there are some people who are irredeemable, and then there is some people who aren't being held accountable, right? And so I think it's super complicated, and I think there is danger in saying we're going to create a list and anybody who has any gossip about anybody gets to put somebody on a list. I know of practitioners who have done things that they regretted and that they learned were bad and that they wanted the chance to do better, right? Myself included. I mean, pardon me while I sound biblical, but who among us hasn't done something stupid that we regretted and realized we hurt somebody by doing, especially if we had power, right? Power corrupts. Power also makes you blind. Power also means that people stop telling you things because they're afraid, right? Even if you want them to tell you. And how do we all get better if we don't all have a space in which we can learn and which people aren't exiled for their behavior, right? But that said, oh my God, there are certain people in this community where we are like, really? You're gonna hire him again?
Yeah.
So I don't have an easy answer, but I do know that for our own company, what we said was we need to make sure we have clear policies on how, if a problem is happening, people feel safe to say, I've got a problem and I need help and I know who to talk to. And I have more than one choice in case the person who's doing it is the person I'm supposed to talk to, right? So at least on a minimal level, if you have any power, you have to create structures that take away your power if necessary and give people advocacy for themselves, right? And make them, help them know that is your highest value, not just an afterthought. So that's one thing. And if you're at the bottom of a power chain, I think the question's harder. If you're an actor who's like, you know what, I need to work at the Guthrie. What the hell do I do, right? Then then I don't know the answers, but I know we have to find ways to speak up.
Yeah.
And ask help. Right?
I would add excommunication as a concept is one that's rooted in like Puritanism, and what it teaches people is that they should be deceitful about their accountability. It teaches people that if I come forward and I say I've harmed someone and I see that now and I want you to not do that, so I'm going to tell you my story, I run the risk of being excommunicated. And that results in de-evolution. So, and there are people who are irredeemable. There are things that are unforgivable. But I want to go back because I don't really feel like Denzel, there was a part of Denzel's question that I don't think we got to, which was like, what are we doing in the 365? And what are we doing with the things that we're facing every day? I don't know if this is the right answer. I'm just like vigilant. I just like stay fighting these people. I just like stay calling these people. I am like, I think I have a particular skill of being like, you know, which is like controversial with some people, but I think that those of us who like have the gift of gab have to do that work. It should not have been. It's never that it should have been your responsibility, but somebody's got to do it. You know, like it shouldn't. I said something about this last time. Like it shouldn't have been Rosa Parks. Like she shouldn't have had to done that, but she did it, and change was made. So I would say dig deep. When you feel like, God, I just can't do it anymore, think about someone who's feeling it more than you're feeling it, and dig deeper.
Jumping on back to the restorative justice element, I think restorative justice is a very important thing. Although I think sometimes people lean on restorative justice really, really quickly without thinking about what needs to be restored to bring that person back into an organization. We shouldn't have people jumping out of the shower and exposing themselves and then being able to perform in local comedy clubs within months. That's not restorative justice. That's just letting somebody saying they're sorry be enough. And saying sorry for a lot of the things that we're talking about isn't enough. If somebody abuses their power while they're artistic director of a local theater company, until there's action to show growth, I don't think that they should be hired by another artistic organization. And so when we do these things, when we allow these perpetrators back into our spaces without actually thinking about what restorative justice means, I think it tells everyone in the community that we're not valuing their safety.
I think we have time.
I just want to be clear, restorative justice is complicated. It is not as simple as saying, sorry, I won't do that again.
Right.
And I think we need to be careful about using that phrase if you don't know what it is. it's a complicated, long journey that requires, by the way, 3 parties. Somebody who's been hurt, somebody who was hurt, and a community to hold them accountable together. And this is the part that often gets left out. I didn't mean that to be my middle finger.
It's the power finger.
I apologize. We are actually just at time. I was going to see if we could have one more. Last day of the Fringe, so please go see whatever else you can in the little time that's left. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much to our venue tech, Ben and Claudia. And thank you to all of you for coming out and listening and because whether you know it or not, now you are a part of the solution. So thank you all very much for being here and for going forward and everybody doing their best.
Thank you,
so
Scott.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.